Yeah. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it appears that the clock on the wall says that it is 9:31. So it's time to start, past time to start, actually. So I'm glad to see everybody here this morning. We are in Genesis, the 33rd chapter. It's going to be a little suspense this morning, but it's going to wind up good. Before we begin our class this morning, let's go to God in prayer. God, we are so thankful to you for the day you've blessed us with, this time that you've allowed us to assemble here at this place so that we may study your word and we may gain truths that will benefit us in our everyday lives. God, every word of your scripture is that way. We just need to sometimes look for it. Be with us through this study, that the things done and said here will be in accordance with your will. In Christ's name, amen. All right. Genesis chapter 33. Something that is long awaited is about to occur. Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him 400 men. Can you just imagine how Jacob feels at this point in time? How to what? Well, now Jacob had already sent an envoy to Esau to give him all these gifts and things. So he just kind of spilled it right on out there. So here comes Esau, with him 400 men. One of the things that you wonder about is how many of those 400 men were his family members. The Bible don't say, but it's a I wonder. One thing that kind of does say to me, though, I'm sure it's pretty obvious that it would be to me that all 400 of those people are not related to Esau. I mean, it's only been 20 years, y'all. So just maybe so, Lou. Maybe so. But I think one thing this does say is that Esau had some leadership capabilities about him. Wouldn't you think? Would you say that? I think that's reasonable to say that Esau has those, and perhaps he is able to have people to follow him. Maybe so. Just kind of a fun little side note that was there with that. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. So now Jacob is beginning to take some defensive posturing here to protect at least part of his family. And he put the maidservants and their children in the front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. So he put the secondary wives, as we'll call them, that's what they're referred to as the maidservants, secondary wives, concubines. They were in the front. Leah and her children were next, and then Rachel and Joseph. So what that tells you is that Jacob placed them in order of, well, for lack of a better expression, how he felt about them. Didn't mean that he didn't love all of his children. Don't misunderstand that at all. But he didn't love this group as much as he loved this group as much as he loved these. Now, we're still seeing favoritism. Did Jacob and Esau not grow up with favoritism? Of course they did. Isaac loved Esau the most. That was his favorite son. Rebekah's favorite son was Jacob. And we see the conflict that caused later on in life. So Jacob placed Rachel and Joseph last. Now the whole point of this operation is, at this point, Jacob don't know how Esau's going to act. He don't know but what Esau may be still mad with him, still want to kill him. And he's brought an army of 400 men. So he may attack the whole group. So the whole purpose of that little exercise is to try to preserve as many as possible so that they can at least escape. And Rachel and Joseph were placed in the very rear so that they had the best chance of escape. I mean, that's one of them things they did back then. That's just, it is what it is. We can condemn him all we want to because he didn't treat all of his family equally, and we got some points there. But the fact of the matter is, that was a commonly accepted practice of what they did. So we'll see things better, I promise, in a minute. So he's done this. Then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Now, what does that tell you about Jacob right now in this verse number 3? What does that tell you about him? All right, he's doing that. There's something else, though, that I want you to see. He is humbling himself. Prior to, Jacob's going, probably before these events, Jacob would have probably been stuck in the back there somewhere, hiding. But he went ahead and said, all right, I am responsible for all of this, so I'm coming up. So he crossed over first. And then he began to humble himself before Esau. Now you remember what the prophecy was, right? In the blessing. The blessing was that and the prophecy from God was that the older will serve the younger. And there's going to be time for that. But I think it speaks volumes here on the part of Jacob that he would humble himself that much 7 times, referring to Esau as his Lord. He is putting himself in a position of he is actually putting himself in a position of serving Esau at this point. Now watch what happens. Now this is to me, this is the most beautiful part of this whole thing, y'all. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Isn't that the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life? These 2 brothers were mortal enemies. The older had vowed that he would kill his younger brother because of the way he had been mistreated, the way he had had his blessing stolen from him in his eyes, his birthright. all other things, truly, at some point in the world, blood will run thicker. It doesn't always happen that way. But I tell you, when it does, it's a beautiful thing. Just like, isn't it a beautiful thing when members of a spiritual family are reconciled to one another? Now, I'm going to guess at a couple of things. One, I think Jacob's breathing a little easier now. But do you think, and just think about this from a human standpoint, okay? Do you think that maybe there was still just a little bit of, between the two of them, I need to keep my eye on him. I think that might have been maybe somewhere in the back of their mind. From a human standpoint, I'd say that'd probably be reasonable. These guys have been estranged for 20 years. They had a wonderful reunion. But I do wonder sometimes if they were ready to wholeheartedly say, yeah, I trust you unconditionally with my life. And he lifted his eyes and saw the women and children. Let's talk about Esau here. And he said, who are these with you? So he said, Jacob, the children whom God has graciously given your servants. Then the maidservants came near, they and their children, and bowed down. And Leah also came near with her children, and they bowed down. Afterward, Joseph and Rachel came near, and they bowed down. So we had them all they all still came forward in the order that they were placed in, right? Then Esau said, what do you mean by all this company which I met? And he said, these are to find favor in the sight of my Lord. And what he meant by all this company was all this livestock that Jacob had already sent to Esau with the message that he had. You remember what the message was that he sent with him? What was it? Y'all remember that? Y'all remember what he told his servants to say? That he wanted to find favor in the sight of his brother. This is a gift. That was kind of paraphrased. Wasn't that kind of the gist of what he said, though? What he had his servants to say? Was he kind of buttering Esau up a little bit, you think? Just a teeny bit. Maybe kind of testing the waters a little bit to see kind of what he was going to expect. Yeah, I think so. I think that is a very Yep. So that was the whole point in all of that, was to try to buy appeasement. And I think part of this is this experience we read about in the previous chapter that Jacob had with this angel when he wrestled with the angel. I think this was a life-changing experience for Jacob. He got a new name out of it, didn't he? What's his new name? Israel. Israel is his new name. That's why we say sometimes when we talk about the children of Israel, what lineage were these people of? From back to Noah. Y'all remember? The Israelites were of the lineage of Shem. And where did all these Canaanites come from? Where were they from? From who? They were from Ham. What was Ham's son's name? Canaan. So, you know I throw a little review in every once in a while, right? I did. Yeah. Noah, Shem, Abraham, them people, and then Ham and all the other evilites. Well, just for lack of a better term, we'll call them evilites. How about that? Everybody was an ite back then. So, anyway, this was a wonderful reunion. Esau got to meet his brother's wives and children. And then he asked his brother Jacob, what was the meaning of all of this contingent of livestock that you sent to me? And Jacob said, these are to find favor in the sight of my Lord. He's still showing humility, isn't he? But look what Esau said. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. Now I'm going to pose a question here. Is it possible that some of the inheritance that Jacob would have gotten from the fact that he got the birthright and the fact that he got the blessing, but he ain't been heard from in 20 years, is it possible that some of the ownership of all of that could have been transferred to Esau? The Bible doesn't say. Now I want to make that clear. That's not a matter of Scripture, but it is something to think about. Perhaps some, maybe. I don't know. Isaac's still alive. Because we're going to read about his death and burial in another chapter or two. He's still with us. Jacob said, no, please. If I have now found favor in your sight, then receive my present from my hand, inasmuch as I have seen your face, as though I have seen the face of God, and you were pleased with me. What does he mean by that? What do you think? It's as much as I have seen the face of God. What's your thoughts on that? Okay. Could it be? See what? Okay. All right. That was kind of along the lines of what I was thinking about. Was what he saw here in Esau was forgiveness and grace. And isn't that what we want to see from God? And isn't that maybe what Jacob saw when he was wrestling with this angel? I think maybe we saw in that, maybe we saw his conversion in that. You know, he knew about God all along, but his actions before did not replicate those of a changed individual, did they? Okay, that's a good point. Does God just let us run amok the way we want to? Sometimes it feels like it when we look at what people do. But God's got a hand in everything, doesn't He? Yeah, sometimes He does. But you know, you can look at it from the standpoint of God's going to just look down here and say, well, why did they do that? That was stupid. Okay, that's them. I'm just going to let them do what they want to and just run with it. But see, there's consequences to those type of things, isn't there? There are consequences to sin. But God is very quick to forgive too, isn't He? Doesn't always mean that we won't have to suffer the consequences. But what it does mean is that we'll be forgiven when we're suffering them sometime, if we're repented. So I saw not only a change in Jacob, but I saw a change in the attitude of Esau as well. And I think that was a wonderful thing. You know, I said before, the fact that these two brothers who had been estranged for so long, and the one hated the other to the point that he would have killed him the first opportunity he got. But that they are together now. And Jacob says here, please take my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. So he urged him, and he took it. It was a common practice during that time for the receiving blessee to politely decline. But Jacob wasn't hearing of that. He intended that he would give that to Esau regardless. It was kind of like, and I thought, when I was reading this, I thought about this. And I thought about how that Jacob humbled himself to the point of submitting himself to Esau. And he gave this offering, as it were, to Esau. Is that maybe just a little bit of an antitype of how our attitude with God is? Have you ever thought about that? Perhaps. We're thinking hard. Well, here's what I mean by that. We humble ourselves before God, don't we? When we're converted. We say, God, I'm yours. Do with me as you see fit. And then what do we do when we have the chance, the opportunity to present an offering to God? Do we do that? Sometimes. Sometimes we do that too. We do. But that was kind of the thought that was running through my mind about that, was how that Jacob showed how he felt about Esau, at least in part, by this offering. His goods, yes. No, what I'm saying, it was actually reversed. He offered that to Esau as part of his buying favor, for lack of a better term. And Esau said, I've got enough, I don't need that. And Jacob persisted. Yeah, all the odd looking stuff. So I don't know, maybe Esau didn't like the way they looked, I don't know. But I think the point here is that I really feel like Jacob meant what he said here. That he wanted to be humble. He humbled himself before Esau. And as a sign of that, he offered all of this as his offering. Kind of like when we humble ourselves before God and we offer ourselves to Him. Isn't that the most important offering that we can ever give God? Regardless of how much we put in the collection plate or anything else, the offering of ourselves as a living sacrifice before God is the most important thing. Yeah, and my commentary talked about that as well. That there potentially may have been some concern that, especially on the part of Jacob, that he didn't want to do anything that would fracture this fragile relationship that they have with each other again. And if that be the case too, you can I think that you can kind of look favorably upon Jacob not wanting to do anything that might fracture that relationship and stir up those old wounds again. That he wanted this reunion to stay, to be permanent. Then Esau said, beginning with verse 12 here, let us take our journey, let us go, and I will go before you. Now Esau is offering his pledge of support, his pledge of protection, if you will, to Jacob. Remember now, he's got a 400-man army. He is 400 strong. So he's going to protect his brother and his family. But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are weak, and the flocks and herds which are nursing are with me. And if the men should drive them hard one day, all the flock will die. Please let my Lord go on ahead before his servant. I will lead on slowly at a pace at which the livestock that go before me and the children are able to endure, and I will come to my Lord at Seir." And Esau said, "Now let me leave with you some of the people who are with me." But he said, "What need is there in that? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. So I think the feelings of both of these brothers were genuine. Don't y'all? Steve? And you know, that may very well be. Yeah, yeah. Yep. 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 So I think there's a lot of point to that, Steve. That Esau was he was a big man here. At least from the standpoint of, at least the ball was in his court, wasn't he? And what I mean by the ball was in his court, he is the one that said, "I am going to kill him," because he done all of this. Esau had an army of 400 men. Now the Bible talks about the fact that Jacob did have some servants with him that had there been an attack, they probably could have mounted some level of a defense. But I think the point is here is Esau had 400 men with him. 400 warrior hunters with him. Jacob was out-weaponed, outclassed, out-everythinged. Well, I think part of that may be the point that Esau's people were hunters, warriors. They were not livestock people. They were not shepherd people. And I don't know that they really even had a good concept of how you would have to handle these livestock. They might not have had a really good concept of how you would have had to handle the young kids. I don't know. We don't know that much about Esau's later life. I mean, I'm sure he had children, but we know from the onset that he was an outdoorsman, he was a hunter, he was a warrior type. It could have been. You're absolutely right. It could have been a supper for a little while. You know? It appears, well, we know that Jacob was told to leave and go back to Canaan. Now, we know that. A couple of chapters ago, the angel told him to pick up, you go back home. Yeah, he's on the way. He's on the way. Well, because they weren't where they wanted to be yet. And they were not where, they were not in Esau's homeland yet. The Edomites actually wound up settling on the other side of the Jordan River. Canaan on this side, and that's the land that was given to the Israelites. So, and here's another thing that's kind of maybe kind of sticky just a little bit, but you saw where Jacob said, "Okay, yeah, we'll come on at our pace, and we'll travel toward the land of Seir, and which would have been Esau's homeland." But that ain't where he wound up at all. So it kind of makes me wonder if he was just like, "Hey, yeah, why don't you just go ahead on, and that way if you change your mind, you won't be close enough to attack us again, and we'll just kind of go where we're going to go here." And I kind of get that undertone just a little bit, because it said here that until I come to my Lord in Seir, and then a few verses later in verse 18, which we're going to get to in just a minute, then Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he fled from Padan Aram, and he pitched his tent before the city. So well, he actually so he went to, I think when it says he built a house here, I don't think it's a house like we think of a house. I think it was a little more movable than the houses that we typically build today. I think this was kind of he was moving slowly, so I think this was kind of a stopping off point, actually, is what this was. It was not a permanent spot. Obviously, we see that because he moved again. You remember the movie MASH and the tents they had there? Well, those were more than just a tent like we think of putting up in the yard out here. They were semi-permanent type structures, but when the enemy got to getting too close, they could bug out. They could take the things down and load them up and haul them off pretty quick too. That was actually what kind of came through my mind when he talked about building a house there, that it was a little more substantial than just a plain tent like you might think of a teepee or something. But it wasn't something that we spend 6 or 8 months building out of concrete and bricks and sawed up wood. So I think somewhere in between that. Well, you know, that's kind of been the whole thing with Abraham. I mean, they moved around. Of course, God told him, go look at the land. Go see it, because I'm giving it all to you. How's he going to look at it if he don't move around? And perhaps Isaac was, to some extent, that way, too. We don't really hear much about Isaac and Rebekah after Jacob left. Yep. Right. And back then, when you're in the livestock business, what are you gonna do? You gonna move them where there's food and where there's water. Now, nowadays, I think sometimes I think maybe Michael attests to this too, that, you know, we move livestock around too sometimes, but a lot of times it's on the same place from one patch to another patch. But it all has to do with where the food and where the water is. So they were practicing rotational grazing way back yonder. But that was the way they lived. That was what they did. And Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. And then Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, and he pitched his tent before the city, and he bought the parcel of land where he had pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Then he erected an altar there and called it Elo Israel. God is the God of Israel. Now, do we know how much money he paid for that piece of property? That's all we know is 100 pieces of money. We have no idea what that 100 pieces of money was worth. That there was no the money at that time was so different that there was really no way to tell what it was worth, but it was something. And he, unlike his granddaddy, he got there and he bought him a piece of land right off the bat. So next week we're going to see that investment turn sour. We got a couple of minutes. Anybody got anything you want to bring up, Steve? Yes. Yep. Right. Yeah. It is. Exactly. Right. That is exactly right. It's one of the things that I've seen here is that there are, each commentary is going to have a little different way about how they portray things, and some portrayed Esau in the greatest light here in this passage of stuff, and to a certain extent, yes, he was in the light. Look at what he did. He was the one that was taken advantage of, and he is the one that offered forgiveness. And then some will put more of that on Jacob, because he's had a life-changing event, and he appears to have turned his life around. And I think that somewhere in the middle of all that is probably where the greatest amount of truth lies. That just like with us today, there's always enough blame for anything to go around.